So this session, of course, is professional development of educators. Our theme today, of course, being professional development of educators, is actually quite dear to my heart at the moment. In HMAS, I have spent a lot of time with staff who've come straight from clinical training and have realised that they need a lot more support coming into the academic area than we were providing them. So any research into the professional development of educators is really important at this moment for CQU. And we're going to be kicking off today with the Story Care project, which is about improving training in aged care for the students and how the staff can be trained to do that. And so our presenter today is Leanne Dodd, standing in for Margaret McAllister.
All right, so this teaching innovation combined narrative, arts and nursing education, and I was on the team as the writing expert to assist the nursing students. We had also Colleen Ryan participated in the workshops as the sort of nursing educator, and Professor Margaret McAllister, and some other people who are on the team as well, Donna Lee Brien, Deb Friel and Denise Wood as well. So the project was funded by a Scholarship of Learning and Teaching grant. So we begin with this assumption that nursing students, like other health students, need to be leaders in promoting health. As the World Health Organization states, health is not simply the absence of illness, but it's also the presence of well-being. Therefore, students should not only be learning about pathology and its prevention, but learning about how to enhance well-being in people that they work with. Our aim was to better prepare students and clinical facilitators, who are our allies in the industry, to make a positive difference to the aged care community by developing narrative competence. Narrative competence is the ability to deeply listen to and respond to personally shared stories. It is key to person-centred care, and knowing a patient's story is fundamental to knowing what they need and what they want. In aged care, as in other contexts, students and staff should be promoting a biopsychosocial model of health, because evidence shows that a balanced model of health treats the symptoms of illness and suffering and promotes the social determinants of health, which are personal well-being, social and community networks, and conducive living conditions. In this sense, health is defined not only as the absence of illness, but the presence of well-being, where a person feels their life has meaning and they are contented and safe and making a positive contribution to the world. Yet achieving this in aged care is a challenge that is daunting. Thanks to global biomedical advances, people are living much longer, and in just 3 decades, the estimate is that 1 in 4 people will be older than 65 years old. So older people are living with multiple conditions, such as heart disease, cancers and dementia. And this means there are more drugs to take, but people are also experiencing a lower quality of life, because in busy nursing homes, imperatives of task completion can result in a lack of person-centeredness. Banerjee outlines this paradox. He says that health systems are providing 20th century medicine for 21st century problems. So instead of a biopsychosocial issues being predicted and managed, they're being left to worsen. Untreated problems such as infections, non-compliance, depression, delirium, and suicide attempts require admission to emergency departments and then referral onto specialist areas that are just not prepared to manage a person who has multiple conditions and requires a team approach. Education too is not fully part of the solution. Students from all health professions must commonly experience clinical placements in acute and primary care settings, where the focus is often on providing snapshots of different illnesses and roles, but they tend to prioritise the acute phase of illness, where only the biomedical aspect is being emphasised. Thus, educators who reinforce this are unwittingly excluding skill development in long-term conditions, such as occurs in old age. This essentially embeds ageism and contributes a vicious cycle. The less students learn, the less they care or seek a career in this booming aged care area. Whilst the care of older people requires technical competence, numerous studies have emphasised the need to also learn holistic, person-centred approaches. Older people are expecting and have a right to personalised care where they feel listened to and respected. So in sum, caring for older people requires a mind shift from a curative focus, which aims for complete restoration of health through rapid treatment delivered by experts, to an adaptation focus, which appreciates that ageing often involves living with these multiple conditions and that wellbeing is possible at any life stage. So as an underpinning for the educational framework for our narrative training, we based it firstly on transformative learning theory by Mesereau. Transformative learning theory aims to create a shift in perspective, moving students from their current perceptions, anxieties, or stereotypes towards a more formed and engaged way of working with a vulnerable population so that they're empowered to be change agents. In order to move beyond the tendency for the normal transmission style of teaching that is lecture-based, where only the educator is active in delivering the content, we carefully structured the learning using a STAR framework developed by Professor Margaret McAllister. So the preparation included finding and using engaging stimulus material to sensitise students, the S of the STAR, so they were ready to learn the new information. Then we devised activities so that students could practice putting this theory into action, the TA of the STAR, and then to reflect, the R, on how new knowledge could be used by them in other settings. We also produced workbooks, including a special one for clinical facilitators. Without their support and understanding of this novel approach, we knew that the skills would not be put into practice. Their workbook contained rationales for activities, including benefits for the service and for the residents. It was important that activities were designed so that they were interactive and for workshop facilitators to promote a relaxed and safe atmosphere for the students. We aimed to be welcoming and to model ways of thinking about and interacting with an older person. We were prepared to prompt discussion and validate students' attempts to collaborate. In this way, we hope to increase knowledge and share meanings. So the workshop took place on the first of a 3-day clinical practicum that the nurses were taking place in, and we intended for the students and their clinical supervisors to understand the relevance of storytelling and story listening in relation to caring for an older person by using deep listening skills and communication skills that facilitated respectful dialogue. Students also then gained skills in turning these findings of conversations into a compelling short story that could be returned to the residents and the community. And the learning resources that we used included, among many other things, 2 videos to trigger discussion. So one we found on YouTube, which we made use of in the workshop, and the other one we made ourselves. So the first video was a Gillette ad that featured an older man being shaved by his son while the grandson looks on. And it explores the reality of increasing dependence in older age and the need for care and respect. The video was very emotional and compelling, and we asked students if this is how hygiene care is routinely carried out. And as they were now sensitised to the feelings of older people after watching this video, we then discussed the realities of loneliness, boredom, and a loss of identity as common experiences for older people in care. Based on later feedback, this video proved to be a very memorable reminder about the value of person-centred care. We then discussed the important role nurses play in building trust and support, even in transitory moments such as passing by a room or engaging in tasks. We modelled ways of intentionally communicating and deeply listening to people. This introduced the notion of story listening and storytelling. We also made a video of a resident's room that was primed with conversation starters. It was filmed using a 360-degree camera. And these conversation starters, and this included a book collection, a fridge full of special food, the CPAP machine, and you can see how they were able to bring up close-ups of these items, became hotspots in the film that could be zoned in and further explored. These hotspots, we explained, could become the topic of conversations that students could raise with the older person. For instance, they might ask, what is that game you have, or what is that machine for? You know, talk about people in photographs in their room. Then we moved on to demonstrate how one meaningful conversation led to the creation of an interesting anecdote shared by a resident that turned out to be extraordinary. Arthur Renton had a newspaper clipping about a time in the 1950s when he made a television from scratch, and it became the first TV to come to Ipswich. We read the story out and deconstructed it to show the creative writing elements in the story and how the use of a narrative story arc with its sequences of rising action and crescendos and climax and resolution helped to make a story more compelling. And students then practiced this story development using their own personal stories in pairs. This was then followed by practice and a task. So afterwards, the students were placed in aged care into their practicum, and because the clinical supervisors had also participated in our workshop, they had a good knowledge of what the students had learned about story development and were ready to support the students in this area. All of the students attempted to converse with residents and find suitable material for a mini biography within their room in the conversations. And the stories produced were compiled into an anthology, which was titled Precious Moments. And this serves as a model for the future and was presented back to the residents and the facility. The anthology was well received by the students and as well as external reviewers that we sent it out to. Following this pilot, we moved to widen access to this successful learning experience by converting the workshop into 2 online courses. And these are freely available in the Centre for Professional Development if you'd like to have a look or sign up and participate and do the course. So there's one course for clinical facilitators, and the other course is for any person, student or external stakeholder. The Introduction to Clinical Facilitation in Aged Care and Story Care in the Older Person. The value of this initiative is that the courses raise awareness of the benefits of technical as well as psychosocial skill development. They also operationalise person-centred care through story sharing. Leaders in the industry and in education should be open to this creative practice and include it as a skill set for all of those who work in aged care. And we've also shown that clinical placements relevant to working with people experiencing long-term conditions can be rewarding and are needed in the world that we are living in. And that's the end of our presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Leanne. I was actually enjoying that so much I completely missed your 10-minute warning.
I don't know how long that took. I was timing myself, but my phone went blank.
According to me, that was 14 minutes. We have time for a question or two, if anyone has one they would like to ask at this point. I would like to ask how you've evaluated the impact on the facilitators.
Yeah, we did pre and post surveys. So there were 2 surveys. There was a survey which looked at their skills within clinical facilitation, and there was also a narrative confidence survey, and we did that with the students and with the clinical facilitators, so to test their communication and narrative competence skills prior to and after the course, and there were some improvements that we've reported. We've actually written some papers, and we will report this back in a report to CQU as well for the Scholarship of Learning and Teaching grant.
Isn't it the case that it's such an obvious thing that nurses in aged care need to know how to talk to older people, but we don't think about teaching that? We presume people know how.
Yeah, the interesting thing was they thought they knew how as well, but their feedback was that that process of finding story prompts was really valuable to them. Anybody else? No? Right, thank you, everybody.
So Dr. Kerry Aprile, Education and the Arts, will be talking about the task of producing work-ready graduates. A similar theme, so it'll be interesting to see the commonalities.
So thank you. I'm going to introduce our presentation on behalf of two of my colleagues who've worked closely with me on this project. Madonna Elsmore and Alytia Brown, and they'll be building on my introduction as we work through. So our presentation is really about how we've used a theoretical framework called Experiential Learning as the basis for planning and implementing our own teaching practices in coursework. The theory is the same one that actually underpins work-integrated learning, and it's got the ultimate goal of connecting theory to practice and enhancing the employability of our graduates. So employability is really about career readiness. And it basically means that our graduates are expected to have the capacities to engage immediately and effectively in the professional settings where they gain employment. But career readiness isn't just about learning a fixed set of knowledge and skills. Professional workplaces today need graduates who are able to adapt to changing or unpredictable situations and exercise problem-solving and critical thinking skills in relation to their work. As such, experiential learning theory provides a model of learning that aims to develop these valued attributes of employability and have guided what we've tried to do with it. The theory can be explained using this simple four-stage model and describes a learning process that's continuous, and it shows how experience, or concrete experience to start with, is translated through reflection or thinking about the meaning of that experience into concepts that guide the choices or plans that might be available to learners for action or for response. So the cycle, as you can see, continues. The arrows show that it provides the basis for that act of experimentation becomes new actions or experiences that lead on to evaluating them and trying out new concepts or new responses. Because it's a cycle where learning occurs by going through all of the stages of the model, the theory is critical of approaches to teaching and learning that are highly theoretical and don't value students' practical knowledge or authentic experiences out in the field. And it's similarly critical of practical experience where students aren't actually drawing on a theoretical basis for the decisions they make about their practices, or where they have no effective chances to reflect on their experiences and relate them to the theory that they're learning in coursework. So understanding this cycle led to the research question that organises our presentation today. We've used the experiential learning model as a guide for our own teaching practices so that the connections between theory and practice are always evident to our students. And this is where our connections to workplace settings become important. These connections might take a range of forms. They might be through collaborative research activities or our own practice in professional settings, or they might occur as part of the site visits that we perform to support students during their WIL placements. But whatever form they take, we believe that these connections to the workplace are our passport to current knowledge and to currency and to planning relevant teaching and learning activities that make a meaningful contribution to our graduates' career readiness. For us, currency comes from the contact with the settings where our students complete their WIL placements. And in this case, it's schools and classrooms. So rather than relying on assumptions about what professional practice looks like in these settings, or our own experience, historical experience of perhaps being a professional practitioner ourselves, the first step of the model involves direct observation of the workplace and practitioners at work within it to answer the basic question of what's going on here, what's happening here. So our observations draw on practices of ethnography, where we try to record what we see or hear or notice about important aspects of the setting that affect what it means to work in the profession. They might be things like the actual physical setting, the use of technology, the interactions, the practices, or even the challenges or dilemmas that confront professionals in these settings. The next step of the cycle involves focused reflection on our part about what we've observed and how it relates to our preparation for students who might enter settings just like the ones we've observed. This process basically involves posing questions to ourselves that attempt to make sense of those observations and their implications for our teaching. So, what does this mean for our students and the way we prepare them to respond to these issues? So this is basically a process of recording our ideas about the problems we recognise, the sorts of decision making that graduates might need to engage in to be able to solve those problems, and also sensing the opportunities for deep learning that the situation might provide. The third step basically means that we ask ourselves, what do I know that will help me here? So for us as educators, this step includes connecting our observations and reflections to the content embedded in our coursework that might help students devise solutions to the problems or make sense of theories that they're learning about and the way that they can be applied to practice. So in education, that might involve linking our observations and reflections to motivation and engagement theories, to theories about effective differentiation or learning and development theories, those sorts of things. As teachers, we put the final step into action by thinking about ways that we can create opportunities for our students to engage with the issue or the problem or the situation that we've encountered. This might involve a whole range of strategies or learning activities that expose them to the issue and help them experiment with solutions. So it might be role plays, simulations, problem-solving scenarios, designing their own activities, analysing and critiquing models of practice. Any of those are the sorts of activities that we might embed in response to our observations. This slide sort of shows how we combine the two. So on the right is the cycle that we're going through that actually triggers the cycle we realise our students need to go through. So you can see that the activities here, our active experimentation phase, involves designing the sorts of activities students will experience as concrete experiences and enact the cycle for them. Their active experimentation can feed back to us to actually devise other responses or build the cycle on from there. So that's basically how we've envisaged using our currency to drive highly relevant practices for our students. I'm now going to hand over to Madonna, who's going to give a practical example of the way that she's used her cycle in her own teaching. Thanks, Madonna.
Thanks, Kerry. Hi, everyone. In my role at lecturing on the Bundaberg campus, but across all of the undergraduate Bachelor of Education programs, I'm very fortunate to be able to go into classrooms and actually see what is happening, and being able to use that to actually inform my own practice. So what am I actually seeing out there? I'm seeing classrooms that look like this. They are very different to what I had experienced and very different to what even some of our own students have experienced. So I remember very clearly a scenario of going in and supporting a third year student in a very similar context to this one, and she almost being in tears saying, how do I teach? Where's the whiteboard? Where do I stand? I'm not sure how to engage with students when they could be sitting in beanbags or on the couch or even on the floor. So how do I capture those students, and how do I make sure that I'm actually meeting their diverse needs? In this particular scenario, in this school, she was also caught up in, it sort of happened to be at the same time, is a trial about the use of iPads in the classroom. And this was very unique in terms of the way in which they were doing this. What they actually did in this particular classroom was they actually joined 3 classes together, so total sum of around about 90 students. And students were actually self-selecting when they would actually go to particular lessons. So they would have explicit teaching times throughout the entire week. Students would actually choose when they would go to those. What would happen then was that my pre-service teacher said to me, well, how do I know who's going to be in my class, and how am I going to differentiate my lesson so that I can actually meet their individual needs? And so this was a challenge, and that sort of made me consider, what am I doing to actually support students that are going to be going into these different learning environments that are very, different to what we experience at the university, but also very different to what they have experienced before. So as part of my role as a university coordinator, I go away and I journal what I see, what I do, what concerns may have popped up, some things that I can inform my own practice so I can take them back into the classroom. And these are some of the key questions that I came across, or that I've documented during that particular visit. This feeling of overwhelm that I have not actually prepared my students well enough for the changing face of classrooms and the associated pedagogical decisions that they have to make. Am I losing touch by not being in the classroom as regular, but being in the higher education field? How can I ensure that my pre-service teachers are able to teach all students, regardless of the learning environments that they're in? You know, part of their registration is diversity of practice, so they need to be in different settings, in different contexts. So what can I do for them to actually make sure that they are able to meet the needs of all their learners? So for what I did, and part of the abstract conceptualization, is actually go back to theories, go back to what we know and what we believe about teaching, good quality teaching and learning. And that sent me back to the Gradual Release of Responsibility by Fisher and Frey. And that really showed that it is about the depth of understanding rather than just getting to the end and getting the content out there. And I really wanted them to actually see that authentic modelling process happening. So, and what that looked like in these different settings may be very different. So I posed the scenario to my third year students and said to them, these are the key aspects that are the focus in terms of differentiation and how we meet the different needs. But what I want us to do is to think about how we can develop a tool or a model of some description that actually helps us to ensure that our planning is encompassing all students, regardless of the learning environment that we're working in. So I went to them, I networked with my colleagues, and actually said, well, these are the key things from the literature, from the research that are evident of differentiation. So we do include all of our learners. From here, we establish a huge amount of discussion, key questions that we work through collaboratively in the tutorial, and said, well, what do we come up with? And it was literally a work in progress. And what they came up with was their own model that we did as a whole class to actually, and some key questions that they could use twofold. One to plan with, but then one to also reflect on their practice with, so that they're continually knowing that they're reviewing and improving their pedagogical decisions based on, regardless of the context in which they're in. So from this actually then triggered this whole experiential learning cycle to actually trigger that for themselves when they took this model into their own planning, into their own classrooms, and they were able to access that and bring that back. So when I go out on visits, I can actually see them implementing it. So there was some significant changes to the way in which they were planning and documenting and evidencing their practice. So it was quite a very worthwhile experience, and I can see how this model has been applied to my own teaching and has influenced what our pre-service teachers are doing. All right, I'll hand over to Alytia now for another example for you.
Thank you, Madonna. Just to finish up, I actually noticed from my own observations and recording from supervision visits of pre-service teachers, the varying quality in the pre-service teacher and supervising teacher relationship, ranging from autocratic, my way or the highway, these coaching style relationships, right down to more of your laissez-faire approach. As a result of these differing relationships, the feedback that students were given differed in detail and style, and as a result, pre-service teachers often had difficulty processing this feedback. Often they felt they couldn't emulate or make sense. So I went away and I reflected. Essentially, my concern was students are going through the same process but having vastly differing experiences, and how can we go about filling these gaps in experience and knowledge? These students need the opportunity to reflect and actually improve on their practice. So I went away and we did some research, and we drew on Wenger's notion of communities of practice. And this is where all participants in a community of practice, regardless of prior experience, learn from each other in collaborative teams as they build relationships, participate in joint activities, establish common goals, and share resources and information. So therefore, putting this into practice, I actually started to integrate elements of the tutorials as communities of practice. So actually allowing students to have the opportunity to share their experiences and reflect on what they've been doing in the classroom through the use of prompting questions. So for example, we might say, share something in your group or on your table that you found particularly difficult this week within your classroom. Once the students had the opportunity to share, and they actually love to share as well, then actually drawing on the community of experience, come up with a proposed solution to those problems that you've either seen being used or actually had to use yourself. This allows the pre-service teachers to actually look at what they've experienced from a range of perspectives. And often if they are struggling because it's a new experience, they realise that it's not personal, it's actually part of that overall reflection and learning cycle. Essentially what we're doing within those communities of practice is upskilling those pre-service teachers through a shared learning experience. Just to conclude, you'll notice today that obviously we've got 3 presenters, and this is because this model promotes those collegial discussions. Often when we come back from site visits, we actually share our findings and notice a lot of these common themes emerging, and this creating our own individual community of practice as well. In guiding our own thinking and promoting the thinking cycle for pre-service teachers, we've found that our tutorials have greater relevance and improve the professional currency for our pre-service teachers and also for us as lecturers. Thank you.
Thanks, Alytia, and also Kerry and Madonna. We might move on to the next one. We ran a little bit over time, but we've got time because we had the extra session drop out. But we'll move on to the next session. And Gemma, who obviously likes Little Britain, wants to talk about The only gays in the village.
Hi everyone, not the biggest fan of Little Britain, but I'm going to do a slightly different presentation. It's not so much on research that I've done yet, watch this space, but I'm going to put theory into practice a little bit, and I'm not going to share my slides right now. I'm going to tell a story. So, picture this, a grade 6 classroom, about 30 kids, really nice teacher. One young girl happens to mention to her friends that she really likes the teacher. Well, the teasing she got. The others wrote, so-and-so loves the teacher on the blackboard, and ooh, every time she was chosen to do tasks. They also said she was really gross for liking that particular teacher, just a little too much. Now, what I haven't told you is that that teacher was female and that girl was me. I was 10. I didn't even know what love was, let alone sexual attraction, but I already knew I was wrong. I had already begun to self-hate. I also began hiding who I was from those experiences from the other kids. Fast forward a few years to high school. Around age 14, it was a much larger school, was all girls and Catholic. By now I knew what sexual attraction was, and I had well and truly learnt the words lesbian, lesbo, and dyke. Yes, I'd been called them in a very derogatory way. I always denied it. I spent my entire school time checking myself. Was I looking at someone in a way that could be misconstrued? Did I let my gaze linger a fraction too long on an attractive female teacher? Did I join in the conversation around the latest hot boy band? Did I laugh appropriately when they were paying out the other girls for being lesbos? Meanwhile, I was all too aware who I was. At home, I was cutting pictures out of magazines, Bon Jovi and Kiefer Sutherland to put on my wall, Dana Delaney, Mark Helgenberger and Julia Roberts to put in the scrapbook that I kept in the back of my wardrobe or closet. I knew I had to hide. I was so ashamed of who I was. I tried so hard to change, and I absolutely hated myself. At the same time, being a Catholic school, I'd been learning about sins, what was right and what was wrong. And I knew I was wrong. If I acted on my urges, I would be a sinner. I didn't want to be a sinner. I didn't want to be me. I didn't want to bring the shame on my family for being such a horrible person. I was planning suicide. But I had a problem. Suicide was a mortal sin. I wouldn't go to heaven. I didn't want to be a sinner. I was caught. I was trapped. So I made up my mind. I wouldn't kill myself. I would hide being gay. I would never indulge in the sins of the flesh. That way I was avoiding both sins. So in some crazy backwards way, I'm only here because I didn't want to be a sinner. At age 14, that's a lot to take on. But there is a happy ending. You see, I was lucky enough at age 17 to go to uni. It was a wonderful, open, inclusive atmosphere. I heard about the student group called the Queer Collective. I saw ally program posters on staff office doors. I kissed a girl and I liked it. Although it took another 14 years, marriage and divorce to a man, to finally shake the stigma, I did finally come out, age 31, and I began to live my authentic life. But I couldn't have done it without the amazing support of my family and friends, but especially support from my colleagues and manager at CQU. So it's a complex world of complex identities, prior experiences, stories and pathways. So today I just want all of you to understand a little bit more about the diversity of our student cohort or staff that we work with, and be able to be open to everyone And that really is the beginning of being inclusive. So I want you to think about becoming a leader in fighting discrimination, and perhaps we can make CQUniversity a bit safer for everyone. So I'm going to share my slides now. And we'll do some of the more boring bits. So is that okay? Sharing, good day. Okay. So there are 4 facets of identity for someone. And gender identity is in the brain. Your expression, the way you express yourself in your clothes and your hair and your jewelry and everything, that's outward to the world. Your biological sex, that's your anatomy. And then there's attraction, which is a separate issue. And all these 4 facets are separate. Now, in the traditional Western view of the world, all of these would align. So you'd have a man, you identify as a man, you wear your suits and ties and short hair, and you'd have the biology of a male, and you'd be attracted to women, or in the nice binary, you'd be a woman, you'd dress in skirts, you'd wear makeup, you'd have long hair, you'd have the biology of a female, and you'd be attracted to men. Reality, it's all rather mixed up. So you can have any mix of those identities in any of those 4 facets, and they don't have to align. And they can be quite separate. I want to impress on you today that these are very individual. There's many different options as there are people, but I do want to go through some terms, some terminology, just to get us all on the same page. Why would we want to go through terminology? Labels. I always say, aren't labels for soup cans? Well, no, they're not. They do help us find information, find support, a common interest. We already use terms like, oh, I'm a student, I'm an academic, I'm a so-and-so, I'm a such and such, I'm a Rockhamptonite, I'm a Queenslander. So labels can be useful to help us form connections. And so having a common lexicon is a really good start, but realise that these experiences may be different for everyone. So, sexual orientation. Gay, we've probably all heard gay. Same-sex attracted can apply to men and women. Lesbian, same-sex attracted tends to be women. Bisexual, attracted to men and women. Now, we've already decided that there's not just men and women in the world. There's the whole range in the middle there. So we more talk about pansexual, attracted to everyone. So not just men and women by the binary. And then there are people who are asexual and not actually sexually attracted to anyone. So what happens in the bedroom should stay in the bedroom. What's this got to do with my class, my teaching? Isn't it private stuff? Well, someone's identity and sexual attraction is integral to who someone is, and everyone should be able to talk in the same way. You know, my wife and I went to the beach on the weekend. Oh, what did you do? Oh, my husband and I went to the movies. We talk about this all the time, and when we're building these stories with people and personalising the experience, it does come into the classroom. So it's important to get to know that. Okay, let's move on to gender identity. So there are 2 terms, cisgender and transgender. Cis means aligned, so the gender identity matches your actual biological sex assigned by the doctor at birth. Trans means a cross or a bridge, so your gender identity is different from the sex assigned at birth. The only other place I've seen cis and trans is actually in chemistry. But anyway, there's the terms there. What about that grey space in between? Well, we do have non-binary, and more people are deciding, I don't want to be put in a box of male or female. And so they decide to be, or they identify as non-binary. But the question's always asked, but aren't they really a man? Aren't they really a woman? Well, gender identity and biological sex are actually different. The identity is in the brain and the sex is biological. And we have to respect a person for who they are. At CQU, we want to respect their gender identity. We want to respect how they interact with people, and that's what we look at. So when you're in a classroom, you'll be talking about the gender identity. And that's what we need to respect. Now, on the topic of but aren't they really a, little bit of a biological lesson here. There is actually another status, which is not male and not female, and it's called intersex. Some of you may have heard hermaphrodite. That's a really outdated term. Intersex people are born with physical, hormonal or genetic features that are neither wholly female nor wholly male, or a combination or neither. So yes, there are people out there, when you hear the argument, well, if you don't know what you really are, look in your pants, or you've got XX and XY chromosomes, well, it's not that simple. So how common is it? About 1.7% of all people have an intersex condition. And there are at least 40 variations known to science. If you are interested, I'd suggest looking that up. Okay, so moving on. So that's just a snapshot. I wanted to try and get all of that out there. There are heaps of terms. If you hear it, get to know it. So what can you do? Be open to sexuality and gender diversity. They use examples. You might say, oh, Jack and Jill went up the hill. Well, what about Jack and Steve went up the hill? Really simple ways just to get inclusion in there. Or Joe went somewhere, they decided to do this. Respect. We respect individuality. We've been talking about people-centeredness. We respect diversity. We respect people. Examine your own prejudices and values. We're not out to change people's morals. If you still believe that it's a sin to be gay, that's your right. What we ask is that you not impose that on someone else. So learn more about the issues. I hope my little story today has shown you that there are people with negative prior experiences that are coming into uni, and you can learn more about those issues. Send signals and signs and use inclusive language. It is okay and is appropriate to ask what someone's pronouns are, and it is okay to use they as a singular pronoun. English academics might take problem with that, but until we get a better option, that's the way we use it. And it is okay to ask everyone what their pronouns are, and to start by describing your own pronouns. That will send an inclusive signal. Now, just talk. We are talking person-centered approaches and encourage storytelling. I mean, that's what we've been hearing about today. Ask, what's your story? Or what's your experience? Oh, that's an interesting term. I haven't heard that before. How do you experience that? And don't be afraid to make mistakes. Just try and learn from them. But if you're asking open-ended questions, you're less likely to make mistakes because you're not going to assume, you're going to ask. So really quick snapshot of the thing here. And it's a bit of a watch this space. We're coming up with some new developments, and there will be some scholarship and some research around this. But in the meantime, we do have the Ally Network. I've been running it since 2011, and there's the email. It's just a connection network on Moodle. There's a couple of other things there as well. Student counselling and the NTEU are very big on this as well. So I'm going to end there.
Thanks, Gemma. Lots for everyone to think about. Does anyone have any questions for Gemma before I ask my own? No? Okay. Just a quick one, Gemma. I know that we have zero tolerance, and I know that we have the induction program, how else should staff be undertaking professional development around LGBTIQ issues?
Well, we've actually developed with people and culture a little addition to the induction and the corporate refreshers. It's called cultural competence, and there are 4 facets of that: Indigenous, cultural and linguistic diversity, sexuality and gender, and accessibility and disability. So there will be more coming. If you want to learn more about it, I'm here for questions. Ask the dumb questions, ask the embarrassing questions. I'm very open to having a chat. There's nothing taboo with me. I'm happy to have a chat to anyone. And of course, you can join the Ally program if you want more information or just to keep in touch.
Any other questions? Maybe we need to chat, Gemma, about how we can get conversations out there more publicly.
Yes, fantastic.
Okay. I have questions for Gemma, but I'm not sure that they're actually on topic. So that's why I said let's try and find some ways to have more conversations about this very important topic in the future. Any questions for any of the others about what's been going on? We've had the Story Care project where we're teaching facilitators how to encourage students to ask meaningful questions and start meaningful conversations with residents in aged care. We had the educational team showing us how will supervision enhances our own teaching and learning practice in order to enhance the practices or the employability of students. And we had Gemma talking about the importance of understanding and acknowledging the LGBTIQ issues in our classrooms. No? Okay. Ryan did make a comment in the chat that he said he wished he'd known about the information Gemma just gave him when he was working with 12 to 25-year-olds. Gemma, what is the age most at risk for students of diverse identity?
That's an interesting question. The stats do say youth. And the stats I have is on suicide attempts in youth, and I haven't got it open at the moment, but certainly youth are higher than the general population, LGBTI youth, and then trans people are even higher than that. So yeah, I think once you start getting experiences and we're going to have a fire alarm and getting that experience, you start to be able to get your resources. And so I think if other people around can really start bolstering that, and the more you hear of good things and the good stories and the approval, the more likely the less likely you are to suicide or have negative self-harm or negative behaviours.
I might be asking for a personal opinion, but I've had the Ally stickers and the cards on my door for many years now. Never been approached for support, but is just having that visible supporting for students?
Absolutely. It is the first mission of the Ally program, I always say, is to spread the rainbow. I've been told that LGBTI people have rainbow tunnel vision, and you see the rainbow no matter where it is or how small it is. You get this rainbow tunnel vision, and just seeing that and having those signs there, because it is hard to talk about personal experiences and talking about it, but it makes it more of a safe space. And that rainbow flag stays behind me in my office all the time, not just for this presentation. Every Zoom I do, every student who comes in my office sees that, so it's out there.
Are there any of the participants here that didn't know about the Allied program and might be interested in hearing more of it from Gemma?
Yeah, Mary's been asking some questions on chat. The Ally Network actually is in Moodle HE, so that's going to make it a little bit hard for vet students. I don't know the ins and outs of how those two Moodles interact. I can enrol them in the Moodle site. I can enrol anyone. Staff have access to view, but if you'd like to actually be enrolled, then you'll get my forum posts and weekly updates and things. And there is optional opt-in training in there to become an ally, a trained ally. Do some online training. It only takes a couple of hours, very self-paced, all the basics. And then we have a 2-hour Zoom where we run through what you can do, building your confidence, how to do it, and touch on those sorts of things.
I had another question that fell off the perch.
Can I ask a question, Dom?
Of course you can.
Gemma, you were saying that a lot of people have got the rainbow focus. So would you suggest that those of us that are allies actually put that we're allies in our email address that goes out to students?
That's an individual choice. I hesitate to say that marketing are not happy if you do anything to the signature block, but I put it below the signature block, so it's not actually part of the signature block. But yeah, I have it in all of my email signature, not in the signature outside.
No, of course not. Message received. Thank you.
So I also have it on a rainbow on my name badge, which is also not approved, but it's there. So. And then, of course, posters everywhere. So it's up to you. It's an individual choice. I always say every ally or everyone needs to be comfortable. Maybe just touch outside your comfort zone, try something new, spark up a conversation, but don't put yourself too far out that you're going to feel like you're floundering or you're putting yourself in emotional trouble or physical danger or anything like that.
So Gemma, my other question was, is this part of your recognised role at CQU?
10% service.
Oh, it's your service component. And you work in ALC still at the moment?
I'm a lecturer in the STEPS course.
Yeah,
mostly. So it's interesting to see how many students come through STEPS who are lesbian, gay, bi, trans, because of that disadvantaged educational background. And so they come through STEPS and they're like, whoa, you're actually inclusive at CQU. I've never experienced this. I've always been bullied. And then they can come in and get a good experience. And if we pass them on to undergrad, hopefully they'll continue to get that experience of feeling like they're valued as human beings.
Fantastic. Kerry, how would this link in with your experiential learning model?
Delma, I think it's very relevant because basically the mental health and well-being of students these days, school students that our students interact with, is absolutely a fundamental part of learning anyway. Our students meet a whole range of different situations, and knowing how to respond appropriately and supportively to individuals as human beings, as people, is something that we really emphasise with them. So it would certainly promote that sort of, and I think it also promotes acceptance, understanding, and removes the stigma that's so often associated with putting people in a particular box and expecting them to behave in a particular way. So our students definitely meet a whole range of different influences. And I think being prompted to think about how they might interact and respond to these questions or situations themselves is absolutely vital to their preparation.
And I think the story is the way to go.
absolutely.
It's what's your story? Open it up and have that narrative of, yeah.
And having the courage to tell your story, Gemma, and being encouraged to. Yeah, I think that is part of it. But storying is so powerful for them as well. But knowing how to respond to it and reflecting on what I will do in this situation, you've still got to go back to some sort of knowledge base to find a way forward. You know, so yeah, I can see all of these things.
It only comes with practice. I mean, that's what the ally training, the Zoom does. We actually think about what would we say if you were out in a school. Actually, one of the scenarios I use is a young gay guy who's a bit flamboyant goes out to Theodore or something on placement, and they ask the question, should I be out on placement or should I not be? Should I hide who I am? And we discuss and we round table how to deal with that and who to talk to and where to find support if it backfires and all of that sort of thing. So, yeah, we do discuss that sort of thing.
And we've actually had a number of those instances, you know, particularly, and a number of females who've particularly sort of thought about who've been placed perhaps at private schools or religious schools, like were your experience, and wondering about whether they'd be accepted within the professional environment.
From a student's point of view at a Catholic school, if I hadn't known any of the teachers were gay, that would have just made my experience so much better.
Well, that's exactly right, I guess. But you fast forward a few, you know, to the 21st century, and things are a bit different. Yeah. But
yeah, for how long?
And I think it is really being exposed to the reality of the real world and real people that is part of the learning experience that our own students have to go through, but that we have to go through.
And it's intersectional as well. I've got to remind people that all of these facets of an individual are not discrete. You can be Indigenous and gay. You can be in a wheelchair and be gay. It's not like you can be Indigenous in a wheelchair and gay. It's not discrete, and you're not just a reminder that it all overlaps, and intersectionality is also important.
But I know too that there are challenges coming for the aged care sector in caring for LGBTIQ residents. A friend of mine is very much advocating for some sort of changes there to allow her to still live her life when she needs to access that sort of care. I think Gemma needs to be doing guest lectures into all sorts of programs at CQU. That 15 minutes was really powerful.
I do have a 20 to 30 minute presentation that I have been giving to lots of groups, and I'm very happy to be invited along when I'm not teaching or marking or unit coordinating.
Oh, come on, that doesn't leave me windows.
No, this is my passion. This is such a priority in my life. I think that I've always made time for it, and we'll put marking aside and we'll do this because it is so important. And we're talking lives. We're talking people dying because of it and self-harming and not getting where not fulfilling their potential and becoming what they want to be.
In the vet sector, there's particular issues regarding the practical-based component, and Gemma and I have just talked about that over the years as well. And we have had students withdraw because they can't manage the practical requirements of it. So
yeah, bikini waxes and things, eh?
Yeah, it's more than well, I'm not sure, but it might have been more than they were realising that we do, and just trying to prepare students for the reality of it.
Yes.
I think it goes across every single course we have. I mean, I've talked to sonographers and obviously nurses and paramedics and everything. It does touch into everyone. I mean, even creative writing, if you're thinking of telling a story, and there's lots of have to write things. And if you start to filter, well, I can't say anything from the heart, I better keep it this way, it really does impact on your experiences at CQU, and we want everyone to be open and authentic.
Any other questions for Gemma, Kerry or Leanne? Okay, can I just ask everybody to thank all the participants, and we'll have an early lunch.
Thank you, Delma. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.